this is just an interview of Charlotte Cole Barton Sornborger.
Right.
And what we're going to just start off with is kind of the basic data. So if you could tell us, when you were born, who your parents were, what...
Oh, okay. I was born on February 15th, 1936, and I was the second of two girls at that time. My sister Prudy is 3 years older than I am. And was born in a hospital in Providence, but then spent my first 5 years in Warren, Rhode Island, which is right next to Barrington. We lived on Linden Street first, but then I don't remember anything from Linden Street because I was too young. Then we moved to Luther Street, which was right behind the big St. Mary's Catholic Church. And I remember quite a lot from there. I especially remember I just loved to do acrobats and to run around. We had a nice backyard, and Mother has some pictures of me doing on the swing. I loved to swing. I liked to be very active. And then I remember particularly from there, my family and my grandparents went to the Warren Methodist Church. Always had nice experiences there. It was a very friendly place. And I went to Sunday school there, and then later on went to fellowship there. That was an important part of my life, actually, because there were people who really loved me. Mm-hmm. And as well, and my parents did as well, but I grew up in a Yankee family where people didn't hug. You knew that people loved you, but it wasn't in a physical kind of way. My grandmother Barton lived next door. My grandfather Barton, Edwin Barton the first, died when he was 70, and I was just 5 years old. So I do have one memory of his, and that and of him, and that was when he sat me on his lap and he gave me a little gold piece that was worth $2.50, and I still have that. So that's my only real memory of him. He had Parkinson's disease, and in those days there was nothing to help you if you had it, and so he died when you go. 70 in those days, was a good age, but now we think 70 is pretty young to die. But Grammy Barton was important in our lives, and Mimi and Puppy, Mother's parents, just lived over the bridge in Barrington. And my great-grandmother, Collymore, just lived down a few streets. And as I got to be a little bit older, when I was 5, we moved to Barrington. And that was when Ralph was born. We moved in just after Ralph was born. He was born 4 years after me. And my parents built a house in Barrington on Highland Avenue. And when I remember...
Is that house still there?
Yes, that house is still there. It's had an addition put on it, but the house is still there.
Do you remember the number?
18 Highland Avenue, yeah.
And then also the one on Luther Street, is that still there?
The house on Luther Street still exists, but they moved it down the street a little bit. And the priests for the Catholic Church live there now.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Was that a big house, or?
It was a nice house. It was a house my parents rented. It was fairly sizable. Yeah, it was. Prudy and I had separate bedrooms, but then after Ralph was born, we were in the same bedroom. I do remember having whooping cough and mumps and measles in that house, especially the whooping cough. They had the most wonderful stuff that I don't know the name of it, that they would rub your chest with. Mm-hmm. And every night mother and dad would come in, and one would rub it on one, and the other one Prudy,
Yeah.
and it would help your breathing for
Mhm.
the whooping cough.
Yeah.
So those are the main things I remember from living over there. But Granby Barton was just a few houses away, so it was a family kind of place.
Yeah. And then you moved to.
And then Barrington was a little bit different. Barrington was right after World War II. Started to be a lot of building in Barrington, but when we were there, there was still lots of open land. I took music lessons and on Adams Point Road, and when I was 7 years old, no problem. I walked. It was probably a mile to get over there, and I just walked through the woods. And there was a path that went through the woods to get my piano lesson and then come home. Mrs. Lenz was my teacher. So there were lots of empty lots to play in. And when I was probably 10, 11, 12, 13, we played softball down in the lot behind, couple lots behind us. It was, now of course all those lots are all built on. But back then there were plenty of places to do. I rode my bike all over town, and I loved school. I was a little bit bored by the time I got to the 6th grade, and the teacher Peter Bennett and I used to have our work done before anybody else. So the teacher would send us to the back of the room where there was a pile of books. So Peter and I went back and we read. And then during 6th grade, I had a wonderful 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Watson. And she had us writing poetry, doing a lot of singing, reading a lot of stories to us. And she had us write our autobiography. And including our prophecy, how we thought ourselves, yeah. And at that time, I had applied to Lincoln School, and I wrote on it that I was going to go to Lincoln School for 6 years, and then I was going to go to college. I didn't know where. And then I was going to have a farm and sell vegetables at a farm stand. That was my idea at the time. Then, let's see, I got to Lincoln School. That was a big thing. My grandfather sent me to Lincoln School. And I think the main reason he sent me was that he did not like my friends. My friends weren't particularly educated. They weren't very bright. They had different ideas of where they were going to go. And so he sent me to Lincoln School, and it cost $600 a year, and that was a lot for them to spend.
And this was your grandfather?
My grandfather Gibbs.
Harold Gibbs.
Yep, Harold Gibbs. I loved Lincoln School. I loved it the whole time I was there. I've always loved to learn. Maybe not everything, and I always did well in school. I was always the top of my class in whatever I did. I wasn't so good in things like history and that kind of thing, but mathematics I was always good at. Science I was always good at, and there was a person who made a big, well, there were several people that made a big difference to my life. One of them was my grandfather Gibbs. And after Sunday school, when I was 13, 14, 15 years old, I would go over to their house, and on Sunday mornings, he would have other fishermen there and other people who worked on him with water pollution, and I heard all of this conversation, and it was very meaningful to me because these people were really trying to do something for the environment. They were really interested in the out of doors and knew that we were having trouble with water pollution, particularly at the end of World War II. problems with DDT. So that was really important, my grandfather Gibbs. Another one was in the 7th grade, I had a science class, a general science class with Eileen McGrath, and this was at Lincoln School. And she was a wonderful teacher, and I had that class with her, and then later on I took biology with her. And when later I became a teacher myself, I used her techniques for teaching. And one of the techniques was, this was in the days when you used, chalk on the blackboard. She used colored chalk. And so when I taught school, I used colored chalk to mark out certain things. I mean, certain things you might do in white, but other things you'd use in color. And so she was very important to me. I had good friends at Lincoln. A lot of them are still friends of mine now. Gwen Anthony, Jane King, Del Lloyd, Faye Rogers, and I still, keep in touch with them, and I see Jane King quite a lot, actually. Other thing, well, social life in high school. Lincoln is an all-girls school, so they did a lot to enable us to get to know guys from Moses Brown or Country Day. So we did plays with the boys. I was in the Glee Club. I don't think I had a very good voice, but I loved to sing, and it was a fun thing to do. I've always loved music. And so we had concerts together. One time we went down and sang with the choir at St. George's School in Middletown. And that was a neat thing to do. So I knew a lot of the guys who were at Moses Brown, and we had parties and parties and parties. Almost every weekend from the time I was a sophomore in high school, somebody's parents would have a party. And then weekends, there were, especially at holiday times, all of the country clubs had dances. I went to dancing school every Saturday night for about 3 years up in Providence. A formal dancing school. My mother made most of the formal dresses, and the boys wore dark suits and gloves. But we learned how to dance, and we had a good time, and we got to know some of the boys in the classes too. So we had a lot of fun that way. My first, well, I had a lot of boyfriends. I was always pretty boy crazy. Very similar to Hope, actually. So I've had a string of boyfriends, sometimes several at a time. But the first meaningful one I had was Pete McLean. And he lived in Barrington. He went to Moses Brown. And I was really infatuated by him, and we did a lot of things together. I spent a Thanksgiving at his house, and he did, he was an interesting guy. He ended up going to Brown, but my senior year at high school, for Christmas, he gave me tickets to go with him and his family to the Boston Symphony up in Providence. And so his family would come and pick me up, and then we'd go and pick up Pete at Brown, and we'd go to the symphony, and then we'd go back to their house and have dessert or something. But that was to me very impressive that somebody did that. He went on. We kind of broke up, got away from, after I went off to Mount Holyoke. But in those days, you didn't break up. You just kind of stopped seeing somebody. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I was going out with him. I was going out with Bill Lang and John Dowling and a lot of other people. You didn't just go out with one person. You did a lot of things. So it was, good high school. It was, you're not always happy when it's going on because, the right guy doesn't always like you, or you don't always like somebody who likes you, but, that's how it went. One summer, I worked for my grandfather. He had a laboratory on the Palmer River, and he was breeding quahogs to see if they could grow quahogs the same way that they grow oysters. And that was a great year too. I rode my bicycle to his house every morning, worked for him until noontime, and then I raced my sailboat in the afternoon.
What kind of sailboat?
Beetle catboat, 12 feet long, gaff rigged. And so that was a lot of fun. Twice a week we had races.
Was that with the yacht club, the Barrington
For
Yacht
the
Club?
Barrington Yacht Club. Yeah, and actually in the summertime, that was the big social center. Mainly playing ping pong. You could swim there too. But that was, playing ping pong was great. You went over and somebody was always playing, so you'd watch, and then when they stopped, you'd play with somebody. And I still love to play ping pong. Dad has the wood shop down there now, so we don't, I don't think I was ever very good at it, but it's a good game. I like it, yeah.
So, and did you have your own boat, or was it a club
Oh, it was
boat?
it was our boat.
Uh-huh.
It was our boat, yeah. My father ran in the Tired Fathers races on Sunday mornings. And Prudy would crew for him, and I would crew for him. And then gradually we learned how to sail well enough so that we could race. I don't think Prudy ever raced as much as I did. And then on weekends, if it wasn't too far away, we sailed to regattas. And Fay Rogers was one crew for me, and Del Lloyd was another crew for me. So I didn't do a lot of things with my sister. She was still is, very different from me. So we didn't, we shared a bedroom, but she was messy and I was very neat. And
I'm sure she'd be glad to hear that.
yeah. And so it was, it was kind of a bumpy ride when we were, but I mean, since we've, gotten married and have our own children now, we're very good friends, but not when we were young. So I'm just trying to think if there was any. Oh, I know my senior summer. I know my junior summer. I worked in the office for my father, Reichel Machine Company. He owned a machine company.
No, actually, just a little tangent, but when did he start that in relative to your age?
I believe I was in the 8th grade when he bought that company.
So this would be a few years later?
Yes, it would have been. It would have been because I was probably 13 and I was 17 this summer. Yeah, so it would have been 4 years later that I worked for him in his office. And it was a good thing for me to do because I learned that I hated office work. And I was never going to want to do anything like that. So it was a good thing to learn. And then the next summer, I applied and got a job teaching sailing on the Cape down in South Orleans, Massachusetts. And that was a great job. I loved it, and they were good to us in that you were free nights. So and of course there was the co-ed camp next door. So I got to meet Ted Foote, and the next year, I'd go down to Princeton to see him. And then I went to Mount Holyoke. I got accepted at both Mount Holyoke and Radcliffe. But when the acceptance came for Radcliffe, I thought, I don't want to go to school in the city. And so I was very glad when I got accepted at Mount Holyoke. And I loved Mount Holyoke, I still do. I go back to all the reunions. My roommate and I still room together when we go. I'm not sure we'll do that again because the last time I went, she snored the whole time. And I didn't sleep at all. But I loved Mount Holyoke. I loved all my classes. I think my favorite class freshman year was chemistry. I had a wonderful chemistry teacher. And she always, the way she taught, I always felt as if I was clinging to a wall. I needed to get a grip, but I really needed to keep hanging on in order to get it. but it was a wonderful course, and I loved that. Um, what other, I liked my English, I liked everything I took there. I took music. It was great to have a music course and get a good background in music. Same way with the history of art, got a good background. That was great. And then my freshman summer, I got a job up at the Mount Desert Island Biological Laboratory. And I was doing, this Dr. Reek was doing early cancer research, and he was injecting photodiluidin dye into sand dollars. And so part of my job was to go out with his kids and dive in 6 feet of water or so and get sand dollars. And we'd bring them back to this little laboratory. It was just a little hut, really. And so I would do the work, injecting them and watching them under the microscope and seeing what happened and so forth.
Do you remember, so like, what was injecting the dye? What did it do? Like relative to
we were
cancer?
looking at to see, yes, if it changed the cells. We were looking at the cells and just seeing if it changed it, and of course it did change it. How helpful that was long term for any research, I don't know, but he came from Marquette University. And that was a great summer. Met a lot of interesting people. There were 19 medical students and just 16 of us girls. So I ended up teaching sailing with one of the guys who had a boat, and so that was a good summer. And so by the time I finished my sophomore year at Mount Holyoke, I knew that I wanted to get into science somehow, either research or teaching. And so back then, it was in the time of Sputnik. And so there was money available for summer, for people who wanted to teach, especially, to get courses. I didn't want to waste good Mount Holyoke courses on education. I mean, I thought it was boring as all get out. So the first summer, I went to Cornell. And learned, people would think it's silly now, but learned how to run a film projector. Because, one of the things you didn't want to do as a teacher, you didn't want to have problems with it. You wanted to be able to turn it on and go and no problem. And so I took 3 courses there, had a wonderful summer there. And also, I roomed with a girl, Barbara Godwin, whom I still keep in touch with out in Colorado. That was also, just before that, too, at the beginning of that summer, I was in the wedding of Del Lloyd. And she married Charlie Drummy, and Dad was a good friend of his, and so Dad was in the wedding. So I met him, and so that was the beginning of our, it was a kind of on and off again relationship. But I wasn't used to anybody like him. I was used to, I don't know what I was used to. But Dad was always kind of like a breath of fresh air. And I think that's the term I've always used. But he was interested in things. He would learn new things and so forth. So I saw him, for the next 2 years, I saw him quite a lot. He was in the Navy at the time, so a lot of the time he was gone. Sometimes he was gone in the North Atlantic, sometimes he was gone in the Mediterranean. In the meantime, I was going out with other guys too. But that was the beginning of that relationship. Yeah, so I graduated from Mount Holyoke in 1958. Marian Anderson gave the address. She was a well-known, singer, black singer, one of the first black singers, I believe, that had been on in opera. And then my first year out of college, I taught arithmetic and general science to 7th and 8th graders at Peck.
So here in Barrington.
Peck Junior School, right in Barrington, yep. I'd gotten a couple of other offers, and back in those days you didn't make much. I was making $3,200 a year. But anyway, it was fun teaching. I had 5 classes, which were a lot of preparation. Usually you don't get that many classes, but it was fun. I liked it. But by the end of the year, Dad and I decided to get married. It was in February, I guess. Dad asked me to marry him, and I wasn't quite sure what to say, but I thought, no, this would be good. So I said yes. And so we got married right after school got out that year. We were married in St. John's Church. And we had a reception over at the Rhode Island Country Club. And back in those days, there were no sit-down dinners at a wedding. It was just people went in, and you might have a glass of champagne. Some people might have champagne. And there were, hors d'oeuvres and things like that. And then there would be cake and ice cream. And so they weren't long. It was, I think they probably began at 4 and we left by 6. And we took a trip up to Quebec. We went to Quebec City, and called it Quebec back then, and stayed at what's the name of that big hotel? I don't remember. But anyway, we stayed at that big hotel up on the Queen's floor. So it was, so we had a good time. It didn't help too much that the men on the boat, the men that he'd worked with on the Saratoga were in town. So one of them had dinner with us one night, and so that was just a little bit different. So we weren't gone for very long, 3 or 4 days. And then we came home, and we lived for the first year up in Springfield at Bay Manor Apartments. We had a nice 5-room apartment for $80 a month. $80 a month, is that right? Yeah, I think it was, yeah. And it was a nice little apartment. We liked it there, and I was teaching biology out at Minichog Regional High School. That was a good job. It was a brand new high school, and so I was the first teacher of biology out there. And I think I probably had, probably 4 classes. But that was fun. I really enjoyed doing that. But then Dad got a change in jobs. He'd been working at Mass Mutual, but he got an offer for a job at Brown University. So he decided he would like to take it. So I had to leave my job at Minichog. We came back here, and I got hired again as a biology teacher at Barrington High School. But by the middle of the summer, I could see that I was pregnant. And back then, you did not teach if you were pregnant. It just wasn't the thing to do. Nobody said you couldn't, but you just didn't do it. So in the middle of the summer, I think the superintendent of schools was the first person who knew I was pregnant, aside from Marty. But I told him, and I said that I would substitute, but I couldn't, in good faith, be a teacher for the year. So coming back here, we rented a house on New Meadow Road for a year. For just part of a year, actually, and then we bought a house on Ellis Street. So by the time David was born, we were up on Ellis Street. We have some neat pictures of Nana coming down when David was tiny. It was not an easy birth. Up at the women's, they're called women and infants now. You're lying in hospital was what it was called at the time. Yep. But he was a good little baby. And then 2 years later, Andrew was born, and Andrew was a much more difficult baby. He had
That being me for the.
yeah. He had colic when he was little, and then when you were about three months old, you had a nasty set of diarrhea, and with dehydration and so forth. So you were more difficult than David. But by the point, so David would have been 2 when Andrew was born, and so we had a good life there at Ellis Street. I do remember that was in the time when people were worried about somebody dropping an atomic bomb on you, and so people had bomb shelters, and or some people had bomb shelters, and of course we never did. But it was a concern. It was when you heard a siren going off, you were worried that this might be an atomic bomb. So that was, I remember that as a concern, and then I remember too. When Andrew got hit by something, it was a tuning fork.
Andrew hit David with
He
a
hit-
tuning fork, I thought.
Okay, Andrew
I thought
hit
I
David.
knocked out one of his teeth with a tuning
He
fork.
knocked out, all right, one of his teeth. But then there was another thing. You got hurt somehow.
I walked into the corner of a shelf. And
Oh,
I
is
still
that
have
what
the
it
scar
was?
on my forehead.
Okay, so you had to have some stitches. And I was, being a mother, you were just little, and I was rather upset. And this wonderful lady across the street, Edith Dyer, she was a good friend, and she came over with a glass of Southern Comfort, with a towel over it so nobody would see it. So anyway, but that was kind of a fun thing that happened over there. And then when, I think you two were about 2 and 4, when we got Carrie with a Newfoundland. And she was a wonderful dog. But of course David would, play roughly with her. And, well, I shouldn't say roughly, he would, play with her. And so what Carrie used to do was grab him by the bottom of the pants. And I don't believe, I think I'm telling the truth here, I don't believe he had a pair of pants that wasn't ripped around around the cuff, because
She dragged him around.
Carrie would drag him around the backyard. Yeah. I mean, it just for fun. I mean, it wasn't, nobody was getting hurt, but it was fun. And then we had some good friends too. We had David Gorham and Bobby Gorham. Then we did some things together, and then Maureen Dolan, that was Brian and Shulman Dolan, were about the same age. And then the Stone kids too, Dan Stone and Owen Stone. And so in those days, women would just, put your kids in a stroller or a wagon and pull them over to somebody's house and have a cup of coffee, and the kids would play. We did back in those days. There weren't such things as play dates. But most mothers were home. Very few mothers were working at that time. So it made, it was not a stressful life. It was easy. You didn't have to rush about things. So we had a good life over in that house. I never particularly liked the house because somebody had lived there before us, and she had a lot of green in the house, and so Dad and I, we redid the whole house. And that was great. We had a good time doing it, and the house looked nice by the time we were done. We got a piano, which was a big thing, and I don't play the piano well, but it's I have to have a piano. So we did that, and I don't remember particularly other things from that house. At the end of the time. Well, I should say, David, when he was little, he was always working things with his hands. He was, if it was cereal boxes, he was piling up cereal boxes. One time he unscrewed the what do you call them, the bottom of the door, the things that holds the door together.
Hinges?
The what?
The hinges?
The hinges in the door, yeah, he unscrewed the hinges. He was always screwing things and unscrewing things, and he certainly had a bent for, mechanical things from the time he was little. Whereas Andrew had really different interests. A lot of it was play acting, when you would put on, Dad's uniform, his uniform from the Navy, and then you and Peter Sifferlin would run around doing da 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 da, Batman, and so you were more into you were into different things. Andrew was very verbal from the time you were little, and then when you were 3 and 5, we built a house here on Wildacre Lane and moved over here.
Can I stop you for 1 second?
Yeah.
Was Ellis Street where you met the Billets?
Yes, oh yes, I should say that. Yes, okay. Another neighbor of ours over there were Gloria and Martin Billet. And they were friends of ours for a long time. It was Gloria who, from whom I learned a lot about raising children. And one of the main things was using Lego blocks was one thing, and another thing was reading. She had books and books and books, and she would, and she lent me a lot of books, and I think that was the time when I really got interested in having a lot of books for you children. Because I was not brought up on a lot of books. We had 1 or 2, but I was not read to very much. Maybe nursery rhymes, but not much more than that. And then Martin also became a very good friend of mine. He was interested in politics. And at the time, we were Republicans, and so he got me interested in being more active, not necessarily as a Republican, but in the goings-on of the town. And I got on the library board of trustees for a while, and I started to get more active in various ways around the town. Then, well, let's see, when Andrew was 5 and a half, Nathan was born. And we probably would have had other children in the middle, but I had 2 miscarriages. So Nathan was a bit behind you two. Nathan was a wonderful baby. He was born with his eyes wide open. He rarely cried. He was just a lovely little child. He always, from the time he was little, he was a happy boy. And he still is a happy person. He's had struggles to go through recently, but I mean, he's basically, there's a happiness that just is in him. And that was evident from the time that he was little. All right, so now he was born. And you 2 boys went to Hampton Meadows School, and then you went over to the junior high, because at the time they were moving kids around in school. You went over there.
David went there, because I went to Peck.
Oh, well, no, David went to Peck. I should have said Peck.
No.
Right.
The former junior.
The former junior high, right, yeah. So you both went over to Peck for a couple of years.
So during that, but you were still mostly at home taking care of Nathan.
Yeah, right. Home taking care of Nathan. And then during those years, Grammy Barton died, Mimi died, Puppy died. So those were, important people in our lives that weren't there anymore. And it was a bit, well, and during those years too, Andrew started taking piano lessons, and obviously had a talent in music. Also, you were always very good in mathematics, and you made all kinds of models of things. had dozens and dozens of them up in your room. David did a few of those, but he was more interested in other kinds of things. He was more outdoors, not getting into trouble, but he was interested in mink trapping or muskrat trapping, in which Dad helped him to do that. He was interested in having a mini bike, and he learned how to put one together, and very mechanically inclined from the time he was, as I said before, from the time he was little. And then, let's see, when David was in the 8th grade, he went to Providence Country Day School. Oh no, I know what I did. When Nathan was 8 years old, I decided that he was old enough to be able to get into the house in the afternoon if I was working. And he was just going to school over here at Hampton Meadows anyway. So I started teaching as a substitute down at Bristol High School in physical science. And I think I was a real flop at it. It was way too stressful for me to have a full-time job and to try to have 3 kids at home. And so at the end of the year, I decided that that wasn't the thing for me to do. So then I got another job that was part-time, and I was teaching up at Hebrew Day School. And it was the same kind of situation. I taught one class in earth science, which I loved, that was really fun. And then another class in chemistry. And it was, I liked both of them, except that I was expected to get all of these juniors taking chemistry into Harvard. And there were some that had learning problems, there were a few bright kids, but not all that many. And so, I mean, they didn't fire me or anything. I could have gone back and taught, but it was just, again, it was more than what I could handle. And at the same time, I was offered teach biology at Lincoln School, which I had always wanted to do. But again, by the middle of the summer, I realized that I just was not in any physical shape because of the stress from Hebrew Day to be able to do it. So I found a friend of mine who went on to teach biology there for 30 years, I think, and I'm sure she did a better job than I would have anyway. But then I still had to make some money doing something. So at the time, Dad and Luther Blount owned the Prudence Island Ferry. So, and the treasurer had
Dad
died.
meaning your dad?
My dad, yes, yeah. Were running the Prudence Island Ferry, and they needed a new manager and treasurer. So they said, "Do you think you can do it?" And I said, "Yes, I thought I could." So I got some help from Bill Morgan, who was the treasurer, the accountant down at Rico. And so I learned how to keep books. So I did all the bookkeeping, I did all the accounting, I did all of the payrolls and all that kind of thing. And I did that for 10 years. And it was a part-time job, so it was great. And I could do a lot of it at home. And it paid all of the tuition so that all the boys were able to get out of school without having to owe anybody any money. So, so that was a good thing to do. But by the time that I didn't have to do this anymore, I was asked by Mary Chafee if I would go on the board of the Barrington Land Conservation Trust. And I was very interested in that.
Hang on a second. So Mary Chafee was the president?
She was the president,
Okay.
yeah. She asked me to come aboard, and I did. And after 3 years, she was having some physical issues. So she asked me if I would become president. And in a very wobbly way, I said yes. I had the time to do it. I really did not have the expertise, but in time I learned the job, and I was president of the Land Trust for 17 years. And I still am on the board, but this is my last year on the board.
And so sorry, let's to get the time right. So
Yeah.
that when you became the president was around what year?
1986.
86.
1986.
Okay, for 17 years after that.
Yep. yeah.
And you've continued to be involved with it.
I've continued to be on the board,
Okay.
yeah. So I was, and during the time, we were given the Pickwill Nature Preserve. That was the first donation we got when I was president. And then the other big thing, and I see it as a real accomplishment, and that was we were able to obtain the Johannes Farm Nature Preserve. We bought this 25 acres from the Johanneses. They had it for sale, and there was a builder who wanted to put in 25 houses, and I got a couple of other people on the Land Trust Board to support me in doing this, and we ended up by getting a bond issue from the town, a bond issue from the state, and then we had to raise some money. So this was the first time the Land Trust ever did any money raising. So I was really always kind of proud of that, and that was an important piece of land for us to have. And then this last year, for the first time, an eagle nested on this property. So that we put up 3 osprey nests. So there've been 3 sets of ospreys, that have been nesting there. So with the Land Trust, I've spent a lot of time outside. I've learned how to identify, marsh grasses and regular grasses and field grasses and all kinds of things. So I've gotten a good general understanding of the naturalist. I'm not much good on specifics, but as a general thing, I can do pretty well with that. And then about 20 years ago, this would have been in 1990, we found that we could get an important conservation easement if we knew more about these turtles that nested at Knockham Hill. So Doug Rayner got somebody from Barnstable, Massachusetts to come and show us how to do this population study.
Excuse me a second.
Yeah.
So Doug Rayner, it was associated with the Land Conservation Trust?
Yeah, he was on the Land Trust Board.
Okay.
Yeah, he was. And he was a wonderful naturalist. I learned a lot from him. And so he needed somebody who could help him out with this. So I jumped in, and so now it's been for the last 25 years, I've done this population study every summer. And we have some really important accumulation of data. It's the most, it's some of the best data that anybody has on terrapins for the whole East Coast. And so people come to us and ask for suggestions and ideas and so forth. And now we work with, it's the whole Diamondback Terrapin Working Group, and we get together fairly often with people from, Wellfleet, Massachusetts, and down, actually all the way down the coast, and so we do that. So, so that's been an important thing for me to do. Meantime, the boys went off to, David quit high school when he was a senior, had 4 months to go. But so we said, well, okay, but you have to pay room and board. So he got himself a job at some chemical factory. And by summer, he thought, well, I really need to get a GED. So he took the test and he passed it fine. And then in the fall, he applied at the University of Montana, and he took such courses as fire jumping, and but he took a wonderful course in history, which he loved. And so he was there for a year and a half, and he didn't get kicked out or anything, but he just decided he liked to learn how to fly. So we thought, well, this is part of his education, so we paid for him to get his pilot's license, and then he got his twin engine license, and then his instructor's license. And he enjoyed doing that. But then when it came to getting a job doing this, he really felt that he didn't have the emotional ability to be able to fly other places, other people. And so instead he moved over to being not an aeronautical engineer, but he went to Aerotech. He went to Colorado Aerotech and spent 2 years there, and so he was a certified technician. Andrew, on the other hand, finished Country Day with flying colors and went to Dartmouth, which I think he enjoyed as much as I enjoyed Mount Holyoke. And Nathan
Also turned down Harvard.
Oh, right, turned down Harvard.
Well, you turned down Radcliffe.
Yeah, well, that's right, turned down Harvard for, I think, probably the same reasons, that it was in a big city, and you know, it's great to go to Harvard, but you want to enjoy it too, and I think he enjoyed Dartmouth more. Yeah. And meantime, Nathan was going through Country Day, and he was not a bad student, maybe a B student, and in 1 year when he started getting into automobiles, and he made himself a mini bike, and we let him ride the mini bike out in the woods, and
a go-kart.
And a go-kart, yep. So he did a lot of stuff like that, similar to what David had done. And then when he was a junior, I think it was a junior at Country Day, Mr. Eaton called me, and he said he didn't like the fact that Nathan was so interested in automobiles and felt that it was distracting him from what he might do at school. And I listened to him, but we didn't disagree with him, because this was a real interest in something. And I have always felt that if you're interested in something, then you should follow along with those interests. And so he ended up graduating from Country Day, and then he spent 1 year in Gettysburg, and he was enrolled in their engineering program, but it was more of a theoretical kind of thing. And it was a 5-year program, and it was not much hands-on. And so after a year, he transferred to Wentworth. And, you know, he really enjoyed Wentworth. And, you know, as time went on, and he reflects on it, he thinks maybe he would have done better at Clarkson, where he had more of a chance to meet girls and this kind of thing. And of course at Wentworth, you know, basically there aren't any. I don't think they might have had a girl or two, but I mean not very many. It's mainly a technical school. But that was his, you know, that was his interest, but he's gone on to do very well. He got some good referrals to do internships, and yeah, you know, he's really enjoyed that kind of work. He likes a challenge. He doesn't like to just feel as if he's riding along. He likes to have a challenge to do things. And in the meantime, I would say, you know, with life with Dad, it's always different because Dad has different ideas, but he's always been very flexible. In that I've been interested in birds. I was a president of the Audubon Society for 2-3 years, I guess, and so Dad jumped into that too, and he's pretty good at birds, and he takes pictures now of birds, and I mean he's got some good cameras to take pictures with them now, and so pretty much what you know, what I've wanted to do, things that interest him, he jumps into, and things that don't interest him, he doesn't. And the same way with things he likes to do. If he likes to do something, usually I'll jump in with him, but if it's something that, you know, down in the workshop in the cellar, I'm not particularly, I'm interested in seeing the final product, but I'm not particularly interested in doing that. And I think of my mother telling me that Khalil Gibran has in one of his poems, I guess it is, it's saying that a good marriage is one that's like a temple, that has too strong, or it has strong pillars, but it lets a lot of air through. I'm just not quite like that, but something like that. And so I think that's the kind of marriage we've had. Well, another thing my mother used to say was that men need a long leash. And so I think I've always given him a long leash, and he's always given me a long leash. And for us, it's worked out well. It may not work out well for everybody, but it's worked out well.
So let me interrupt here, just
Yeah.
because there's something I wanted you to talk a little bit about, and that is Dad's an alcoholic.
Right.
And
right.
if you could maybe just talk a little bit about, what was it like when Dad was drinking? What kinds of things did you encounter? How did that, get resolved? Or
All right.
was it, that sort
Okay,
of thing?
so Marty had a drinking problem apparently from the time he was in college. And when I married him, I did not know it. And frankly, I never knew it. I think I only saw him drunk once. But Dad learned, as a lot of alcoholics do, to drink things that didn't smell too much, like vodka. And so basically, I did not know he had a drinking problem. He had a personality problem, and sometimes we just couldn't see eye to eye on things. And it seemed to me that it was his problem, but he always seemed to think, well, no, it's your problem. And I can't tell you exactly what the interactions would be. Dad agreed that, I told Dad I thought that maybe he was an alcoholic. And he said, well, I don't know, but he was willing to go over and talk with Charles McCulloch. So we did, and it was very helpful. He said, I don't know whether you are or whether you aren't. But he said, why don't you let it go for a year and see what happens? And so we did. And things seemed to be okay for a little bit, but then I started finding more caches of bottles out in the shed or in the garage and so forth. And so I realized there was a problem. So and they'll tell you what Al-Anon to never do this, but so I confronted him one night he was coming home from work, and I said, I know that you're an alcoholic now. And I said, either you stop drinking or you leave. And so he said, okay. He said, I'll think about it. So for the next week or so, I really, I was sort of panicky. Because I just knew I could not live with somebody that I knew was an alcoholic. So he went to AA. And I believe he went to AA for 2 years, and so far as I know, he never had a drink after that. I don't believe that he did. And now he will say that it was more difficult to give up smoking than it was drinking. But anyway, that worked out fine, and I should, afterward, just because you stop drinking doesn't mean that you don't have alcoholic behavior. And he still does. I mean, not a whole lot of it. It's a lot less than it used to be. But when he does, I just say, look, just be glad that it's occasional and not very often, and just let it go with that. So and he can be sharp and critical, but it's not bad, and most of the time it's fine, and so I just learn to overlook it. And one important thing, and after he stopped drinking, was that Dad had been looking around. He knew there was something, he knew that church wasn't the answer for things, or at least he'd never found the answer there. I hadn't found the answer there. And so he found TM. And we did a couple of other things first, actually. We did the Gurdjieff for a couple of years. But then we started TM. And he started it first, and I was quite upset by this, because to me it was just what I thought it was, being mystical and scary and so forth. But after the first week or two, he came home, and I thought he was fresh as a daisy at supper time, and I was still dragging in the kitchen. So I thought, well, I'd like to know what it's all about, and maybe there's something to it. So then I learned, I think maybe a month later, and you know, I started to see colors as being brighter, and after a while I started noticing a big difference in myself. And so now, I've been doing it for, what, 35 years, something like that. And of all the things I've done in my life, I think that's been the most important thing. Because it's opened all my horizons, and realizing that there's more than just the, well, it really isn't more than just the here and now. It is all of the here and now. But just kind of seeing through things, realizing that this is an amazing universe that we live in. And, you know, particularly with this physics course I've taken, you know, it shows you in physics that this is how, you know, this is how it is. That the basis of everything is, you know, are strings and not things that you can put your hands on, and we're all made out of that. I mean, as the universe cooled down, then you started losing some of the unified part and things to, in the coolness. Then you started to get, you know, quarks and molecules, and finally the creation of stars, and then a second generation that turned, the helium stars would have been the first one. But then things like such as our stars happened because things started to cool down, and so basically we are all this huge field, except that we also have this physical being that we are a part of, and so the learning TM was a big thing, and this course was a big thing for me. Just having a much better understanding. You know, Hagelin doesn't say, no, this is how it is, but he says that this is parallel. And so you can see the parallel for yourself if you wish, you don't have to. Anyway, so that's been really important. But, you know, the alcoholism, as far as I'm concerned, is just, you know, he hasn't had a drink since, and there's, you know, not a problem.
So it didn't, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, if he hadn't stopped drinking, I'm not sure what would have happened, because I don't think I could have lived with that, knowing what I was living with and thinking that it was never going to change. But it did change, and so it made a big difference. It also makes you a lot more empathetic with other people who live with difficult problems, because some problems, it turns out, aren't so easy to resolve, and so that's been very helpful. Another thing that's been helpful, I mean, it's a literal pain, but it's been helpful, and that is that I had some gallbladder surgery probably 7 years ago now, and had nerve entrapment from it, and there didn't seem to be any answer to it. And maybe 3 years later, I went to a neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins who thought that if he cut these 4 nerves and bent them under, that you know, the pain would go away. And he did. Well, for 3 nerves it worked, but for the other one it didn't. And so I have been basically in pain ever since. But I know what things cause it, and I try not to do it. You know, I used to do all of my making cookies by hand, but I learned that if I use this arm a lot, if I bend over a lot, that it just kicks the whole thing up. I mean, I can always feel it, but I'm taking now medication that I'd rather not take. But and the medication allows me to live a, you know, pretty normal life, and I just know what things that better off not to do, because it's just going to make it worse. So but again, that's been another thing that gives you a lot more empathy for people that have ongoing pain problems. And realizing that, if you keep in a positive mode, then things like that aren't so important. And that was another, it still is an important thing of Grandma, in that she has been a very spiritual person from the time she was young. And I think I'm probably the only person that she can talk to about all of this, because most other people aren't interested. Now, Denise, the gal who's been taking her out in 3 days, she is pretty much on the same wavelength, not quite, but pretty much. And so they do a lot of this kind of talking and reading and that kind of thing. But it's been great that I think there's good reasons for Grandma having lived to be 105. Yeah. Because so many of us have really benefited. I mean, we've all benefited in seeing somebody being so positive. She, no matter how bad things are, it's always the glass is half full. And she basically loves everybody. She may have her own private prejudices or whatever, but then she's lived through 105 years, and so, which is a different kind of growing up. But she's very open-minded. When David came with all of his tattoos that time, probably 10 years ago now, he's covered with tattoos, and so I told Grandma. And so she asked David about them, and she said, well, let me see them. And so David took his shirt off, and she saw all his tattoos, and she said, well, I like this one, or I don't like that, or whatever. And so she's very open-minded that way. She's not, this is a great lesson for everybody in the family, and we have such a big family that I think everybody has learned from her, and people really enjoy going to see her. It's not a burden to go and see her. So she gets a lot of company, and so that's been good. I'm fortunate in that I've really had a good life. I've had a lot of benefits. Some of the benefits have come because my father, he didn't make a lot of money, but he made enough so that we have been able to get some of the benefits of that. And, we are certainly not wealthy, but we can do things like take trips out to, your house or David's house, and I feel, free to give not big amounts, but moderate amounts to, Audubon and other environmental causes. To you kids when you need it. I've had a good life. I've learned a lot. And to me, the ongoing learning curve is the important thing. The Miss Cole, who was the principal of headmistress of Lincoln School, she gave an ethics class to all seniors. And one of the things she said, and it stuck with me for a long time, and that is happiness is the realization that you're still growing. And for me, that's been true. If I were to just start to play bridge or something like that, I'd be miserable. But so long as I'm still learning something, it can be anything, it doesn't have to be, too much. But and I enjoy painting. I'm not much good at it, but I'm not a risk taker, generally speaking. But when you're painting watercolor, you can be a risk taker because it's only a piece of paper. And so I really enjoy doing that. I don't have a lot of time to do it, but I will take courses again this winter, and you work for 6 weeks with somebody, and then in the spring I'll do that again when we don't have to do something else. But so I really enjoyed that, and it's fun to take pictures of all your artwork so that you can look at it later, because otherwise you just forget what you've done. And it's no big thing, but it's fun to look at. And then along with Nathan, I have been, well, to a degree, interested in genealogy and finding out things about interesting people in our background. And you know, one of them is that Thomas Brownell, who was in the Civil War, and one was that George Brown, who was a cooper and then on a ship and telling all about his adventures on the whale ship. My grandfather has certainly been, you know, an important part, and that diary he wrote when he was young, very interesting to read. So it's, I think those are the main ones, but it is just, you know, to kind of know where you come from. And in one way it doesn't make a difference, but in another way it does, because you have some of the same genes. And as you have noticed, that picture of Aunt Hannah, and you know, I look just like her. So there are the genes, and then more recently reading this book about Nelson Blount, and just realizing that David just plain old has some of his genes, that's all. I mean, being a risk taker, not as much of a risk taker as Nelson was, but just kind of jumping from one interest to another. And that is just, that's how David functions, and that's how Nelson functions. And, you know, they're always interested in learning something new, not necessarily sticking with it, but learning something new and trying something different. And so that part, it's fun to know about your family that way. My father took a big risk when he bought Ryko, because he had 4 kids, and he was a draftsman. And but he thought maybe he could, you know, do a little bit better than that, and so he bought Ryko Machine Company. It had only 6 people working there, and they only made one kind of tool for American Screw Company. And so he had to mortgage the house for $50,000, and he borrowed $50,000 from Ted Vetterline, and he made a go of it. He made a go of it. I mean, so he had he was making more. He was interested in the challenge of doing it. Excuse me. And I think we've all benefited by learning from him, and also benefiting by having, you know, some of the material things that we might not have had. I mean, we all could go to college. We could, you know, here and there. One time he bought us a Volkswagen van. But we had ours was really having problems. Oh, okay. So we got the van so that we could put all 3 kids and the dog in it and go up to Tyrol or go down to Westport. So you know, so that I think I've given you a pretty good picture of what my life has been like. It's been a good life. Hasn't always been easy, but it's been you know, it's been a good life, and I've been fortunate.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.